I'm very excited to have this person join us because they are affiliated with our partner organization, the Frank Church Institute, and because of that affiliation and the things that we've collaborated with together, it's very nice to have him join us on stage. So please welcome Todd Achilles, and thank you for introducing our keynote speaker, Todd. Todd is the chair of the Frank Church Institute and Program Committee. In addition to being an accomplished professional, veteran, and all-around great guy, he is the Democratic member of the 16B District to the Idaho House of Representatives. So again, thank you, Todd, for doing this introduction for Nina.
Thank you very much. My name is Todd Achilles. I'm Idaho State Representative, Public Policy Instructor here at Boise State and at UC Berkeley, and as Danielle said, also a member of the Frank Church Institute Board. Now, the Frank Church Institute and the Andrus Center are really sister organizations housed here at Boise State. Both institutions draw inspiration from the legacy of two of Idaho's greatest political leaders, who, by the way, were both Democrats. So I am honored to introduce and welcome back to Boise for a second time here our first keynote speaker, Nina Jankowicz. I met Nina 2 years ago through my work at the Frank Church Institute. She was the keynote speaker at a conference we had about democracy in the 21st century. And she helped us understand the threat to our social fabric from foreign disinformation campaigns, which are often amplified, sometimes unwittingly, by domestic political partisans, and this is happening both on the left and on the right. And these hostile foreign campaigns can be very effective at cutting away at the threads that bind all of us together, that bind our pluralistic society. Ms. Jankowicz is one of the nation's leading thinkers in this complex, evolving space. She has more than a decade of disinformation policy work in government and nonprofits. She was a Fulbright Fellow in Ukraine and a Keenan and Disinformation Fellow at the Wilson Center. And interestingly, for 3 months in 2022, she served as the executive director of President Biden's Disinformation Board. Before, ironically, the Biden administration caved to a sustained right-wing disinformation campaign and shut the whole effort down, leaving Nina exposed to just a flood of lies. She faced and still deals with attacks from a misogynistic internet, where a copyrighted cartoon character has more protections than a woman from non-consensual explicit imagery. So Ms. Jankowicz is now the co-founder and CEO of the Sunlight Project, which is increasing the cost of lies that undermine our democracy. And in addition to all of this, Nina is a musical theater nerd. And if we're lucky, she'll give us another rendition of the anti-Trump protester in his colonial tricorn hat. Again, welcome you to use the cards on your tables to write any questions for Nina following her address. And with that, please welcome Nina Jankowicz.
Thank you. Good morning, everybody. How you doing? Thank you, Todd, for that lovely introduction. I'm really excited to be with you all today and to be back in Boise. The last time I was in Idaho, I was a few months postpartum. I packed up my breast pump and got ready to leave my husband and my infant son home in Virginia. And as I left for the airport, my husband told me to be careful. This wasn't an idle warning about air travel safety. He meant it very literally. Just a few months earlier, as Todd was just telling you, I had become the target of a widespread hate and harassment campaign. In March 2022, I was appointed to lead a new effort in the Department of Homeland Security called the Disinformation Governance Board. It was a scary-sounding name, but its mission was boring: to coordinate DHS's response to the growing threat that disinformation posed to our country's security, safety, and democracy, and to set policy on how to do so while protecting civil rights, civil liberties, and privacy. This was something I had studied for years. I had testified before Congress 4 times, published a book, written for major publications, and appeared on every major news network discussing disinformation and what we could do to mitigate it. I had advised members of Congress from both parties, foreign governments, and tech companies. But when the news of my appointment broke, politicians and political influencers saw a 33-year-old pregnant lady and lost their minds. They lied, and they said I was going to be America's chief censor. Tucker Carlson called me a supremely confident young woman, which I suppose in his mind is an insult. And he alleged that I would have the power to send men with guns to the homes of Americans with whom I disagreed. A dangerous lie. They didn't just lie about me. They went after me because of my gender. They used my online presence, one that was authentic and fun, sharing my hobbies, yes, like musical theater, in addition to my academic research. And they painted me as an unserious, silly little girl, or worse, a power-hungry, sexualized woman. They criticized my breasts, my chin, my nose. They enlarged pictures of my face to highlight my pregnancy acne. They commented on my weight gain from pregnancy. They said I appeared to be transgender. They wondered how anyone could have impregnated me and told me that my eggs were all dried up. And they told me in graphic terms that I was President Biden's whore. And that's not the worst of it. Tens of thousands of people sent me those abusive messages. Our personal information, including our home address, was released on the internet. I received a deluge of violent threats, including to my unborn child. My face was plastered on the New York Post and on an improvised munitions handbook. I ended up tendering my resignation 3 weeks after the attacks against me began, in May 2022, and that wasn't because of the abuse itself. It was because the administration really did not have my back. We're all here today to talk about women and leadership, and increasingly, online gendered abuse, harassment, and disinformation are all challenges that women at all levels of our leadership journeys, and our employers, and yes, the men who want to support us too, need to plan to contend with. A few days into my ordeal at DHS, one of my supervisors called me. I think it was meant to be half sanity check. He wanted to know if I was going to make things even more difficult for them, and half pep talk. He told me, "You're in the arena now," referencing Teddy Roosevelt's famous Citizenship in a Republic speech, known colloquially as the man in the arena. In it, Roosevelt says, "It's not the critic who counts, not the man who points out how the strong man stumbles or where the doer of deeds could have done them better. The credit belongs to the man who is actually in the arena, whose face is marred by dust and sweat and blood, who strives valiantly, who errs, who comes short again and again, because there is no effort without error and shortcoming. But who does actually strive to do the deeds, who knows the great enthusiasms, the great devotions, who spends himself in worthy cause, who at best knows in the end the triumph of high achievement, and who at the worst, if he fails, at least fails while daring greatly, so that his place shall never be with those cold and timid souls who know neither victory nor defeat." Now, I thought this was pretty badass at the time. I was in the arena, right? I was doing the deeds, daring greatly. Critics could come at me all they wanted. I was going to concentrate on serving my country and working toward arming the public with good, trustworthy information. If only. You see, not everybody at the department saw it that way. They seemed to prefer that I not be in the arena at all. They weren't doing much to protect me. Not in the media, where they issued hollow statements days later than they should have, while the spin machine continued to pump out lies about me. Not physically. My worries about being attacked were downplayed. They told me that if I was afraid of somebody attacking me, I should go into headquarters more frequently, while I was a couple weeks away from giving birth and COVID was raging. And they certainly didn't have my back emotionally, while I became a folk villain for millions of my fellow Americans. You see, the more that I reflect on that Roosevelt quote, after 2.5 years of dealing with a cyber stalker, of being recognized on the street by people who wish me harm, of frivolous legal cases, dreaming about intruders entering my home, after 2.5 years of changing the way I move through the world to reduce risks to my safety, I've realized that my boss deploying this quote was another instance of a woman being told that misogynistic rhetoric, that violent threats, that the sexualization and objectification that we face every single day was just part of the job. It was just time to suck it up. If you can't take the heat, they tell us, get out of the kitchen. Well, ladies, I'd like to invite the men into our kitchen and suggest that maybe they get a thermometer with a higher upper limit. Whatever adversity men have faced, thank you. Whatever adversity men have faced, we have had more. And we've done it while pregnant, or cramping, or having a hot flash and in heels. Neither my DHS boss nor Teddy Roosevelt, who, by the way, only refers to women and mothers throughout his speech in their capacity as wives and mothers, neither of them could fathom that these critics could not be ignored, not when my safety and the safety of my growing family was at risk. In the lead up to the 2020 US presidential election, the Institute for Strategic Dialogue, a think tank in DC, found that women candidates for office were far more likely to be the target of abusive, often gender-based messages than their male counterparts. On Twitter, abusive messages comprised 15% of those that women research subjects received, compared with only 5 to 10% for their male colleagues. ISD writes, on Facebook, female Democrats received 10 times more abusive comments than their male counterparts, while Republican women received twice as many abusive comments as Republican male peers. The abuse was compounded for those women of intersectional identities. Later in 2020, UNESCO and the International Center for Journalists surveyed over 900 journalists from 125 countries, finding that 73% of women respondents had experienced online violence, including physical and sexual threats. 20% said they had been attacked or abused offline in connection with the online violence they had experienced. 20%. In the same period, my research team at the Wilson Center embarked on a groundbreaking project analyzing the discourse surrounding 13 women politicians during the 2020 election. For 2 months, we collected mentions of these candidates who spanned demographic and political divides across 6 social media platforms. Now, as a women-dominated research team, we knew these conclusions were not going to be pretty. We were women with public online profiles, after all. But the sheer volume of the abuse, even outside of that nauseating content, was shocking. We uncovered 336,000 pieces of gendered abuse and disinformation against our 13 research subjects, with 78% of that targeting then-Senator Kamala Harris and her historic vice presidential campaign. The tenor of that content was sexualized, racist or racialized, and transphobic in nature. Abusers claimed Harris had slept her way to the top, or that her sexuality precluded her from government service, with nicknames like Heels Up Harris. They pasted Harris's face on pornographic images or on bodies in suggestive positions. In one breath, abusers employed racist stereotypes about black women, and in the next, they claimed #KamalaAin'tBlack, alleging that Harris played up her African American roots to win votes. Harris's opponents were so unable to fathom a woman being successful without being duplicitous or exhibiting male characteristics that they claimed she was secretly a transgender man named Kamal Aroush. And of course, the moment Harris announced her intention to run for president in July, all of these gendered and racist attacks roared back to life. Sadly, you don't have to be running for president to receive attacks like these. This rhetoric affects women up and down the ballot, across the country, and across party lines. It affects staffers and students and any woman using her constitutionally protected right to free expression. And if you happen to be a woman with an intersectional identity, if you're Black or Latina or a member of the LGBTQ community, the data show that you will receive more and more toxic abuse than others. To put it simply, to be a woman, online or off, is an inherently dangerous act. These attacks we endure are meant to silence us. They're meant to encourage us to stay home and not engage in politics, journalism, activism, academia, careers, or public life more broadly. There is plenty of evidence that suggests that these attacks change how women engage in public life. In my own experience, I know I think differently about how to promote my own work when I'm actively dealing with abuse. Should I send a provocative tweet, pursue research, and publish writing on issues that could attract criticism? Post a picture of myself online, giving the men obsessed with dissecting my appearance fodder for their next hate campaign? Should I highlight an event like this that might attract a heckler or worse? Sometimes, when I'm engulfed by imposter syndrome or simply too tired to deal with another wave of online bile, the answer is no. But even in those moments, I know I'm not alone. The International Women's Media Foundation found in a 2018 global survey that 40% of respondents avoided reporting certain stories as a result of online harassment. The next year, the National Democratic Institute found that politically active women around the globe sent fewer tweets in the aftermath of online abuse, experiencing a chilling effect. An anonymous blogger who asked for her name not to be used because she was concerned about the attention that writing would attract, told journalist Helen Lewis in 2011, quote, "The misogynistic abuse that a number of women bloggers and writers have received functions as a form of censorship and warning to the ones currently not experiencing it to watch what we say." A leading internet researcher and personal friend told me in an interview that when she's harassed, oftentimes her solution is just to shut down her account, to go completely offline and not post for days or weeks. She said she doesn't feel safe to continue speaking, so she doesn't speak. But what about young girls and women observing these campaigns? They might feel joy at Kamala Harris's rise, but will they want to follow in her footsteps when they encounter the persistent abuse campaign that scrutinizes her appearance, her race, her ethnicity, her sexuality, all based on misogynist tropes? In the course of my research, I've had the privilege of running focus groups with high school and college-age women. And for each one, the answer was no. These young women told me they are extremely hesitant to make their voices heard, online or off. A 19-year-old from Virginia told me, "I don't want a lifestyle that public anymore." According to a 2020 survey from Plan International, some girls have stopped using social media altogether because of the harms they face there. And adult women are self-censoring and self-selecting out of public life too. I worry that with every post we don't make, every opportunity we don't take, every time we scroll on by instead of making our voices heard, we are tacitly ceding Roosevelt's arena to men. And that's not only bad for women, it's bad for the world. According to the United Nations, women's participation in peace negotiations increases the probability of a peace agreement lasting at least 15 years by 35%. Women legislators are more likely to make bills dealing with children's and women's and family issues a priority. And they're more likely to pass bills, period. A 2010 study looking at 138,000 bills across 4 decades of congressional activity found that women lawmakers were simply more effective than their male counterparts because they focused... Even Todd's clapping for that one. They focused on consensus building, they exerted high effort, and they specialized in issues, enabling them to see more bills signed into law. Just last week, a Harvard Business Review study upended the long-held stereotypes that women are too emotional to be good leaders. It found that in high-anxiety environments, women leaders were less abusive than their male counterparts. By contrast, men engaged in more abusive supervision, including behaviors such as being rude, ridiculing, yelling at, or lying to their reports when their anxiety was high. Sure, the UN and Congress are high-stakes environments, but as that study shows, the tactics that make women great leaders transfer to the operating room, the newsroom, and the boardroom too. We need more women in those rooms. We need more women in the arena. And in an increasingly digital world, that means preparing ourselves to stay in the online arena too. Now, there are a lot of steps Congress and tech companies should be taking to protect women's equal rights online, and it is beyond frustrating to feel the onus on us is on us to fill that gap. So until they do, we unfortunately do need to make sure that we protect ourselves and support each other to make sure that you can make your unique contributions to our public discourse. Now, this is going to get a little technical here. Bear with me for a second. This is all important stuff that I think everybody should know. There are a few basic security precautions that anybody uses the internet should take, but they're especially important for us women. When I was dealing with the worst of my abuse, the private online security consultant that I hired told me that if I hadn't had these steps already taken care of, things may have been even worse for me. Men on anonymous internet forums had been actively trying to hack my devices and gain access to my personal accounts, my photos, and other private information. If you take these steps, it'll be much harder for anybody who might be trying to do the same. First, use a password manager rather than coming up with weak, easily guessable passwords for every website you log into. Here's how they work for the unfamiliar. You create a single password that logs you into a password manager service. This is the only password that you're ever going to have to remember as long as you're using it. Because from there, password managers offer browser plugins and apps that will put your passwords in from site to site. You don't need to copy and paste them anymore. And if you ever update them, the service will log that change automatically. And they can identify weak and potentially breached passwords that have been affected by large-scale attacks or leaks. I'm glad everybody got their paper and pen out. I liked that. Good energy. Next, set up multi-factor authentication on all the accounts that allow it. You're probably already using this and you don't know it. If your bank is sending you text messages every time you log in, that code that you input is the second factor verifying your identity after your password. This can be a code generated by an app. It can also be a physical factor, so a USB stick or a Bluetooth device that communicates to the platform and says, yes, this is really Nina or Danielle. And if a criminal were trying to gain access to your two-factor protected account, he would have to input your stolen password and be challenged to use that second factor to confirm your identity. So unless you were, God forbid, kidnapped along with that USB stick, there's no way that that person could get into your account. Beyond that, I want you to all be really careful about the details you share online. Online violence does move offline. Don't lead the bad guys to your door by sharing photos of your real-time location or details about the patterns of your life. For instance, that you get tapas on Tuesdays with your girlfriends. As a friend of mine and a former intelligence official told me, anything that depicts a pattern of life puts you in a vulnerable position to somebody who's going to choose targeted action. So here's how that tapas tidbit might play out with my own online profile. My author biography notes that I live outside of Washington, D.C., and I've tweeted information about elections in Arlington County, Virginia. So even a casual Twitter user can probably deduce that's where I live. Google reckons there are 7 tapas places in Arlington. If I shared a photo from my last girls' night online, it would be pretty easy for somebody to analyze the surroundings, the decor, the menu, and cross-reference that with the location, decor, and menu of Arlington's 7 tapas places, and he could show up uninvited to my next girls' night. It's a scary thought. But you can mitigate the risk. Don't share photos of your real-time location or the outside of your residence or neighborhood. Be really cautious about posting details that could establish the patterns of your life, what bus you take in the morning, your favorite coffee shop, the park you visit with your kids. Make sure the photos you post of your pets, let's not forget Fluffy and Fido, don't include their tags, or better yet, turn them to face in on their collar so you don't have to worry about it anymore. Once you've battened down the digital hatches, there's still a lot to do in terms of getting the right mindset to engaging with an online environment that's full of nastiness. Remember, the men who are targeting you ultimately want to silence you and drive you away from public life. My friend Van Badham, who's a playwright and columnist for The Guardian, always reminds me that the abuse we experience isn't a problem to be solved, it is an ongoing tension to be managed. So how do we do that? We use the tools that the platforms give us. Contrary to popular belief, you are not required to stoically sit behind your computer and force yourself to endure abuse. Your social media profiles are not a democracy. They are a queendom. Mute your trolls. They can shout into the abyss forever, and you're never going to need to see them or hear from them again. Use the block button for serious and persistent abusers. That is what it is there for. Do not feel guilty about it. Understand what isn't allowed on the platforms, because they do have rules, and make reports about bad behavior. It's possible that the platforms take no action, but at the very least, you are giving them data points about what is happening on their sites, and at best, the person abusing you experiences some consequences for their behavior. And however tempting it might be, try not to respond to the trolls directly. I am guilty of this sometimes too. But these guys just want to take up your oxygen and hitch a ride to your star by engaging in debate with you online. Sometimes, particularly if you have a lot of followers or you're a lot kind of savvier and smarter than the person you're engaging with, it can look a bit like Daenerys Targaryen torching King's Landing from her dragon. That's not something we want. My friend Van says there's a psychological payoff to swatting a fly, but to the outside, it looks like you're bombing a village. That's a successful short-term strategy, perhaps, but in the long term, it becomes a branding problem. If this all sounds exhausting, it's because it is. If you learn one thing from my remarks today, I hope it's this. It is impossible to do this alone. If you have a public profile, there will be times you will need what I call a circle of solidarity to hold you up. On the other end of the spectrum, there's going to be times when your worst experiences will allow you to support other women going through something similar. Your circle of solidarity will be there in all of those moments. Now, creating it is not something that happens serendipitously to me. It is part of a very deliberate strategy that I am continuously implementing to build community, camaraderie, and a more equitable and hospitable internet for women, especially those from marginalized communities. During every bout of online hate directed at me, my first stop for advice and my preferred space to vent has been a WhatsApp group of women writers. These are women from all sorts of diverse and disparate backgrounds. Some of them are reporters who cover politics. One covers wealth in Dubai. Others write New York Times best-selling fiction or true crime. One is a poet. What unites us is that we're all women, we're all online, and we all write. And that little pocket of the internet, along with a constellation of family, friends, colleagues, and my therapist, if I'm being honest, have gotten me through the troubling and isolating experiences that I have had with angry online mobs. And outside of that group, I've cultivated a long list of women I met online simply because I was an admirer of their work and I reached out. We became friends. They're now part of that circle too. I do this because when I wrote How to Be a Woman Online, I learned that men's tweets are retweeted twice as often as women's. I now make it a point to deliberately amplify other women's work and to use the term that my friend Seyi Akiwowo coined, to be an active online bystander. That means when the going gets tough, if I see abuse happening, I report it, I call it out, and I send a note of support to the targets. Don't underestimate what that means to women who are being abused. During the lowest times I've had over the past 2.5 years, it's my girlfriends who took me out for pizza or sent me flowers or came over for a glass of wine who stand out the most. It's the people who sent me messages that said this shouldn't be happening to you, and especially those brave enough to speak out publicly, even though they risked getting caught up in my dragnet of abuse. They were the ones who got me out of bed every day. and they're all part of my circle. And of course, it's my husband and my mom who stood by me at every step, even if they didn't initially understand exactly what was happening. They kept me sane. Yeah, they needed a little help at the outset. Sometimes you got to explain what's going on to your loved ones, but now they are my rocks. Now, you might need to explain what's going on with your loved ones, and you shouldn't have to do that when it comes to your employers. Just as every employer in the digital era has a policy covering what's acceptable when employees post on social media, they need to have policies for what happens if their employees should encounter serious online abuse in the course of public engagement for their jobs. It was clearly something the Biden administration had spent no time thinking about when the massive abuse campaign came after me. And I'm proud to say that since then, I have written a model online abuse policy that has been implemented by 2 nonprofits and is available to any organization that wants to make it their own. It includes assistance with removing private information from the internet through services like Delete Me, assigning someone to take over a team member's social media account in order to triage and log abuse, providing safe lodging for team members and their immediate family if their personal information is shared online, assistance with local law enforcement, or with raising complaints to social media platforms regarding online behavior that violates their terms of service, and support with threat monitoring or public crisis response. To the executives in this audience, this is the least you can do for your employees who are representing you in the online world. Remember that women and marginalized communities are doing so at a great cost and risk to their own personal safety and security and that of their families. Ultimately, policies like this engender more free expression. When employees know that management has their back, they're going to feel more confident communicating not only about work, but contributing their unique talents and perspective to make a better world. For women, these are the policies that help us stay in the arena, even as we encounter our days when faces like ours, to use Roosevelt's words, are marred with dust and sweat and blood. And there's one more thing that has helped me get through these past couple years, something that I thought had been stolen from me in all the ugliness that was deployed against me, and that's joy. You see, one of the things I prided myself on before I went to DHS was that I was myself online. As a card-carrying millennial, I have pretty much engaged in every social media fad from the early 2000s onward. I had a live journal and a Zanga. On MySpace, I painstakingly rearranged my top 8 so I could choose featured songs and, play little contests of who was popular with who. My Facebook page, to this day, contains albums of blurry photos from my very first digital camera documenting performances, trips to restaurants with friends, my first days at college, all of this, all organized neatly in embarrassing titled albums. And yes, as Mr. Achilles said in his introduction, I love musical theater. I wasn't shy about sharing that online. I have participated in community theater throughout my adult life, too. And in 2021, I jumped on the TikTok bandwagon as a place to combine my work and my hobby. I was seeking to explain complex topics in videos that were, back then, only 60 seconds long. And I made a few silly, deliberately campy, over-the-top TikToks explaining my research on gendered disinformation, complete with costumes and ridiculous voices. One afternoon, with a face full of makeup after a TV interview, I quickly wrote a parody of Supercalifragilisticexpialidocious from Disney's Mary Poppins, and I was explaining the topic of information laundering. This is when false or misleading information is cycled through multiple sources to obscure its original source. I posted it to TikTok, where it got kind of a lukewarm response, and also to Twitter, where it quickly garnered tens of thousands of views and lots of positive engagement from experts and non-experts alike. I joked, "You can call me the Mary Poppins of disinformation." I thought that making this video was fun, it brought me joy, it combined the things I loved, it combined my research and creative expression, and it was unabashedly silly and fun. It was me. Now, the right and some on the left had a field day when they found that video when my DHS appointment was announced. Fox News aired clips of it over 100 times. They called it embarrassing. They said my singing was bad. Even Politico described the video as cringe. They're entitled to their opinion. I disagree. Then, right-wing politicians unearthed even more videos of me singing at cabaret nights from years prior, and even videos of me performing as a teenager. They ridiculed those too, as if having hobbies was something to be embarrassed about. Now, in combination with the constant stream of threats and harassment I dealt with any time I posted, it felt like the space to express joy and be authentic online had been completely closed off to me, even long after I resigned. I couldn't bear seeing male colleagues posting pictures of their beautiful babies. I couldn't share mine. I couldn't post selfies, couldn't make jokes, and I absolutely could not post videos of me singing. This harassment campaign, in short, had not only cost my safety and security, it had cost me my joy and my sense of self. But I've come to realize that it was reclaiming that joy, bit by bit, that has gotten me through the past 882 days. Giving birth to a beautiful baby boy, his first laugh, his first steps, his developing sense of humor. Dancing with my husband at dusk in the middle of an ancient olive grove in Greece, celebrating our 10-year anniversary. Enjoying girls' night with my best friend at our favorite Italian place where we sit at the bar and order giant plates of pasta and drink half-price cocktails all night long. Dressed up on a boat in the canals of Venice, watching the sunset among a bunch of really incredible women leaders. Every single time another woman tells me my books, my work, my continued persistence, despite everything, has meant something to her, These are the types of joyful moments that I'm going to continue to cultivate and share and claim despite the trolls who want to steal them from me. As Teddy Roosevelt warned, let the man of learning, the man of lettered leisure, beware of that queer and cheap temptation to pose himself and to others as a cynic. The poorest way to face life is to face it with a sneer. Yeah, that's nice, Teddy. But I would rather leave you with some womanly wisdom. I'm gonna sing for you. This is a song called, I'm gonna use that pause to get a little drink of water here. This is a song called Armor by Sarah Bareilles. Anybody know it? One person, woo! And I'm going to do this to spite my trolls, so I'd like to sing it with you. Please snap along with me. To all the dirty looks the kitty cat calls, to the ones in tribe who are up against the back walls, let me tell you something you'll understand. Only the little boys tell you they're a big man. To all my sisters and all our friends, you've got to thank them, please. Strength means blessed with an enemy. Oh, my armor comes from you. You make me try harder. Oh, that's all I'll ever do. Oh, my armor comes from you. You make me stronger. Hand me my armor. Thank you. I'm going to take a picture. Yay! Thank you. Thank you so much. I'm really looking forward to the discussion. I would love to take your questions. So let's do it. Thank you.
Amazing. Thank you, Nina. That was so fantastic. Let me remind you all, you have question cards on your table. Write your question down. One of our amazing volunteers will run around, pick those cards up, and bring them up to me. Wow, what an inspiring kickoff for today. And I get the opportunity as a historian to be the annoying person that says, well, there's kind of always been bullies. There have been people harassing women as long as there have been women, right?
Sure.
So what's new? And how is this new in your experience?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I think it's something a lot of people don't understand. So in my second book, How to Be a Woman Online, I open it by saying, describing this scenario of a woman riding the metro in Washington, D.C. on her way to work, and a guy starts talking to her and kind of like trying to flirt with her, and she's not having it, right? But then it becomes something much bigger than that. She runs into somebody who exposes himself to her. She runs into another guy who's heckling her, and she gets to her office, and there's a crowd of people shouting slurs and horrible things at her. In that situation, we can call the police, right? We can say, excuse me, there's a mob outside of my place of employment prohibiting me from getting in. All of these people are threatening me with violence. Please come do something about it. In the online world, we don't have that luxury yet. There are some laws that are frankly not fit for purpose that women can use to deal with targeted online harassment. So my cyberstalker, who was going after me persistently for about 8 months, I was able to get a protective order against him. It was a really excruciating process that when he appealed the protective order, because nothing says I'm not stalking you like appealing a protective order, I had to be questioned by him. I had to sit in a witness box because he was representing himself in court, because of course, and I had to be questioned by my cyberstalker in court. It was a ridiculous thing, but I had to use essentially the law that victims of domestic violence use when they have somebody who is going after them physically. As Mr. Achilles mentioned, there is not a law for deepfake pornography. This is when somebody edits your image or creates a lifelike photorealistic image of you engaging in sexual acts. There's no federal level legislation for that. About a dozen states have it. So my answer is that when there's violence happening to you online, or even if somebody is persistently, stalking, harassing, targeting you, there are legal remedies. For the online world, it's like the Wild West, and often, in fact, the research shows that the platforms don't do a lot about this because they frankly benefit from it. When there's spicy stuff happening online, the more enraging the content, the more engaging the content. We have become the product, and they're making money off the fact that we are being abused. That's the difference.
Absolutely. Thank you, Nina. One of the audience members says that social media abuse and attacks have been normalized, to kind of follow up on the point that you just made. How do you suggest dealing with that and teaching our children that isn't normal, what should be normal?
Yeah. Well, I think one of the most important things is to remind everybody that there is a human behind the screen. So I told this story at the reception last night, and I'll tell it again now. I often get pretty nasty messages, no offense to the old guys in the audience, from old men on Facebook. And often they will have pictures of their grandchildren as their profile pictures. And I'll look at their profiles because inevitably they don't have very good privacy settings. So I do a little bit of research about them beforehand. And then I write to them and I say, "Hello, John. Thank you for your inquiry. Your grandchildren are really cute. I've got a 2-year-old. I see you served in Vietnam. So did my dad. I see you like football. My brother coaches high school football, and my nephew is like the star running back on his team. We've got a lot in common. We both love this country. You've been lied to about me. I just want you to know that somebody read that horrible thing that you wrote." And often they apologize, because they don't think that I am a person. I've been villainized to them, and that's often what's happening with victims of abuse as well. They forget that there actually is somebody behind the screen, and I usually bring in wives and daughters into it too. Would you want somebody to say what you've just said to your wife, your daughter, your daughter-in-law, whatever? And that chastens them a little bit. So that's something I do. When you receive the level of abuse that I receive, unfortunately, you can't do it with everybody. And for some people, it does make them dig in more. The other thing that I like to do, and I describe this in my book, is I take screenshots of some of the abuse, and I remove the identifying information. And then I share it to my followers because it raises awareness of how common it is. Like pretty much every time I go on the radio or on TV, I get something. One of my favorite ones was it was right before the full-scale invasion of Ukraine. I was talking about Ukraine a lot on TV. I was also like 6 months pregnant at that point. I didn't look the greatest, and some guy wrote to me and he was like, "You have dark circles under your eyes." And so I was like, "Yes, I do. I'm not sleeping." I took a screenshot of it. I took out his profile picture and his name, and I shared it, and I said, maybe it's that I'm 6 months pregnant, maybe that the country I love is, about to get invaded by Russia, or maybe it's Maybelline. People liked that, and it kind of undermines the abuse. It makes fun of them. These guys, big macho guys, don't like to be told that they're silly, and it also doesn't further the cycle of abuse, because a lot of people will retweet directly, or I'm using Twitter just because it's the platform that I used to use the most, but this applies to any platform. Or you can do the little thing in the Instagram videos where you like put the comment and you make a video replying to it. I don't like doing that because it often sends more people to send nasty things to those guys. And even though, there's no love lost between us, I would prefer not to further that cycle of abuse. So that's how I raise awareness of it, and still kind of keep the tone of the conversation civil.
That's a fantastic public-facing sort of answer for how you deal with that. One of our audience members would like to know what you tell yourself on the inside. So what sort of thoughts or mantra got you through cyber abuse to singing on the stage with an amazing audience of women with us today?
It's hard, and I don't want it to seem like I'm not screwed up by all of this. I am. I mean what I said about my therapist. I think, first of all, I was lucky to, even before the worst of the abuse happened, when I joined DHS, everybody deals with some degree of it when you're a public-facing individual. I had known that there were women who were looking up to me already, and I was adamant. One of the reasons I left DHS is because they weren't letting me talk to the media, and I just felt like dampening that story down and trying to push it under the rug and just hope the news cycle moved on and we got away from it was like a huge mistake, because it would tacitly condone it. Now, what they did also tacitly condone, because they ended up shutting down the board, ended up tacitly condoning those strategies as well. But I talk about this all the time. And it's in part because I want to make sure that I recognize the faith that a lot of young women have in me, and that I'm not ceding the ground to the bad guys. The other thing that I think about is my son, honestly. I hope that one day when he learns about the time period in which he came into the world, he looks at it and says, wow, it's amazing that my mom got through that and didn't, become a yoga teacher on Hawaii, which I really do want to do. But it's those two things, thinking about like how we can keep pushing these barriers and pushing for more progress, and demanding better, because I think our country is better than this. It's better than this.
Thank you for that. There's a follow-up here on that last point, which is that how do we teach the next generation, boys and girls, that it's not just boys will be boys, and it's okay for boys to be mean to girls in this sort of way? Yeah,
so this is a tricky one, especially when we don't have the legal infrastructure that is necessary to show that there are consequences for your actions online. You may have heard a lot about deepfake pornography becoming more prevalent in schools for girls as young as 12, being depicted by their classmates using nudify apps, or some of these apps and kind of services that with one picture of a woman can create a deepfake of her in a couple of seconds. They're doing this because there is nothing stopping them. And often when these situations happen, it's the girls who are punished. It's the girls who have to carry that weight for the rest of their lives. Often they want to change schools, because I wouldn't want to go to school with a bunch of boys who attempted to do this to me. And so for me, establishing that legal infrastructure is the first step to helping denormalize all of this, even for young kids, because it's a little bit like drugs and alcohol, right? I hope people will be using deepfake porn less than they use both of those things. But still, you know that there's a consequence. When you're going through middle school and high school, you have these drug awareness and education programs. You know that this is what can happen to you, and it's a way to derail your life. I think it's one of the most important things. And then, underlying all of this is kind of this embedded misogyny. So if a boy grows up learning that women are inferior or that they're there to be objectified, and we learn all of this from kind of our social and cultural situation in the country as well, then they're gonna replicate that behavior, and that's hard generational work that can't be undone with the passage of a single law. But hopefully, talking about, again, there's somebody on the other side of the screen. This could follow you your whole life. It does have effects offline. I think there's a big misunderstanding that online and offline are different things. They're not. The same person who's using the computer is the same person who goes out and then walks down the street. And connecting that for people and making sure we talk about it that way is really, really important, especially for young people.
A follow-up on that, too. Are online threats investigated and prosecuted? At what level, and who does that work?
Complicated question, because it depends on your state, and Todd can probably answer better what the laws here are in Idaho. But in my experience, when I went to the county police with my cyber stalker, who has a history of showing up to places of employment, events, he says he doesn't show up to people's houses, but since I work out of my home, I don't believe him. And filming them and harassing them as they try to get away from him. And he had kind of expressed an interest in my son. I hadn't posted pictures of my son on the internet for obvious reasons, and he was like, "I don't think that he exists. I want to go see if he exists." And that was it. Mama Bear was activated. She went right to the police. And when I talked to the detective, he said, "Well, where does this guy live?" And I was like, "He lives in New York City." And he was like, "Well, what do you want me to do about it?" And I said, "New York City is a 3-hour train ride away if you take the fast train. This guy's come down here before. He comes to Washington a lot to go to hearings on the Hill. He's not going to stop himself from coming just because it's a train ride away. And I would like to have a piece of paper in my hand that says that he has to stay a certain distance away from me." And he really did not help me through the process. I had to kind of navigate it myself. I had people who were helping me through that, but it's something that cost me time and money, and I'm glad that I have it. I'm going to have to re-up that protective order in a couple of months and probably go through the same rigmarole again. But again, I would say in general, and we actually just released a paper about this that looks at all the laws all over the world dealing with what is called in academic parlance, tech-facilitated gender-based violence. Say that 3 times fast. It's a bad acronym. But online abuse. And it shows that these laws, with very few exceptions, are just not fit for purpose for women. They are not up to date for the cyber era. And so often when you bring stuff, the law enforcement, the best quote from a book by Danielle Citron, who's a privacy and online rights scholar for women, says, it's like saying you're drowning and they don't know what water is. That's often what it's like. And it's not their fault. They're not trained. They don't have the infrastructure to prosecute these things, right? So you do need a lot of support. And again, I think that's where employers come in the room. If you've got a system that says, "Oh, you're being abused because you're the face of this campaign online. Here's what we can do for you. We're going to track all of this stuff so that if you want to go to law enforcement, you've got a file. We're going to help you find a lawyer and maybe we'll support you with that. We're going to do X, Y, and Z." Having someone help navigate is so important, because when you're in the thick of it, you're not thinking about taking screenshots and preserving evidence and making sure all of this stuff is there for a cogent case to law enforcement. We're trying to change it. We're trying to put pressure on lawmakers to make sure not only that we're changing the laws, but we're also funding the law enforcement so that they have the training that they need to navigate these situations. Because right now they don't. The people who are good on tech, they're not going to public service jobs that pay very poorly. We need to attract those people to law enforcement and train up the ones that we've got. And it's happening in some states, but not across the board. It's unfortunately a depressing picture.
Absolutely. There are a number of questions, and thank you for all of these wonderful questions up here that follow up on the thread where you talked about not being supported by your boss immediately and also your employer. And several folks want to know what they should do on day one to sort of make sure that they're covered should that happen, and would love to know where to find the policy that you mentioned.
Yeah, absolutely. So let me start with that. This is posted on my old organization, the Center for Information Resilience's website. If you search "being online should not come with worry" and then my name, it will come up. And it goes through the model policy. This is for a nonprofit. I think corporations could probably level up because they have a bit more resources to throw around and make sure that for everybody, you're sweeping their personal information off the internet. I don't know if you guys know this, but in the States, our data is a commodity and it is heavily bought and traded. So you can look up everything from your address, your phone number, your parents, and everybody related to you's address and phone number to like what seat you like to sit in on an airline and the last time you had your roof redone. It's crazy. But you can request that information be removed. Doing that yourself is difficult, but there are services that are called Delete Me or Canary with a K. I've used both of them. They're both great. They'll do that for you. And I think that's something that should come as like a matter of kind of first step for all employers. In terms of what else to do, I mean, having that policy set up is hugely, hugely important because then you have a playbook to follow. But I think making sure, that the target of the abuse feels safe in their house, and that kind of changed for me over time as things ebbed and flowed in the 3 weeks that I remained at DHS after everything blew up. Make sure that you're in constant contact with them, you personally, because my experience with the law enforcement, the federal law enforcement who were helping me, was that they were really, they were kind of patting me on the head and saying, "It's okay, little girl," saying that these folks were all bark, no bite. And again, I'm like 36 weeks pregnant, like waddling around and worried that, when I get gas, somebody is going to stop me because they saw me on Fox News. Like I was very, very visible and recognizable, and they were kind of undermining my worry. So make sure you're not doing that, and connect with your employee directly. Don't always just kind of pawn them off on somebody. And ask them what they would like, because everybody's appetite for engagement is going to be different. I'm sure a different woman in my scenario, maybe she would have stayed in the role and just battened down the hatches. I didn't feel like that was right for me, but maybe some people would want to talk to the media. Maybe they wouldn't. I think everybody's appetite is going to be a little bit different. So having that personal connection and again, validating the feelings, I think is really, really important. And as long as you've got that policy there that explains ahead of time what the employer has promised to do, then I think you've both got a guidebook of what steps to take next.
Any specific advice for women that run their own businesses or CEOs of their own and have to put their address on the
Yeah, don't do that. I learned that the hard way. So actually, that's how we got doxxed. So I had a consulting firm before I went into DHS that I had used like an online filing service to get everything done. And even though I had not even a post office box, but basically a UPS box with an actual street address listed, I think because I had the materials and all the filing documents sent to my home, something got messed up along the way. And even though I corrected it immediately, there was still evidence of that correction on the internet, and the trolls who were really interested in targeting me, that's how they found it. So I would encourage you, women CEOs, nonprofits, business owners, to make sure that you've got a UPS box or similar as your address or your work address, and B, and this one is a little bit more complex for homeowners, and believe me, I'm there. If you're buying a new home, what I would suggest is that you put it in a trust if you think that there is a potential for somebody to target you that way. It's not something that everybody has to do. I think if you're in a high-level government position, if you're running a big company and you already receive some of this abuse, it's a good step to take just as a precaution. Certainly, if my husband and I move, we're going to be doing that in the future. Now the cat's out of the bag. There's kind of no point for us to try to do it retroactively. But I will say my county was very receptive when we called them and said, hey, like we've been doxxed, we'd really like you to take the record of our purchasing the house off of your online register, they did it immediately. So it depends on your county. Some might bristle at that, but I would encourage you to call and ask if you think it's going to be a problem as well.
Really concrete steps there. Thank you.
Yeah,
Thank
well,
you for that.
fortunately, I've had to walk through a lot of them myself.
But sharing that with other people can be really empowering. So thank you for that. This one is a two-part. Number one, I love your voice.
Oh,
Jazz
thank
hands
you.
forever. All right. And then the second one's a little deeper. Why do you think people are so threatened by strong women?
Whew. How much time do we have? Is there wine available? I mean, the simplistic answer is that obviously men have been leading for a very long time, and by necessity, if women are coming in, particularly in the realms of politics, that means a male is going to be unseated somewhere, right? I think that's the very simplistic answer. I think there is something much broader than that that speaks to the role of influencers and this kind of macho male identity. Men not necessarily, I was watching something last night actually that said that men who think of themselves as exhibiting feminine characteristics are actually more likely to be the folks who are abusive because they have that deep-seated insecurity that they might be seen as weaker than. There's a lot of research on this. I guess I'll just stop to say that I think there's a lot of work to be done on misogyny, particularly in our country. It's not strange to almost every other country in the world that we've got a woman running for president. It's only strange to us. There's been, 80-something countries that have had women heads of state or elected leaders. So we're the ones that need to do the work to get used to that. And it's about changing how we cover women in the media. It's about naming and shaming some of the tactics that we see going on. And it's also about doing work with men and boys to make it okay to feel emotions, to exhibit those qualities that are seen as more feminine that might help them be less abusive leaders too, at least according to that Harvard study, right?
Yes. Well, and I thought about that when you talked about your WhatsApp. Certainly one of my refuges is a text chain, a WhatsApp with my college roommates, right?
Yeah.
And we're all over the world, but that's private, but a use of the sort of internet. One of the audience members wants to know about ways that technology has empowered women. So we've focused mostly today on abuse and sort of curtailing their power.
Yeah.
But do you have some ideas and thoughts on how social media,
Off the stage.
don't go too far, or other forms of technology have been empowering for women?
Yeah, I mean, I think you can look to movements like the Women Life Freedom movement in Iran, or even the women who are standing up for women's rights in Afghanistan. I mean, we wouldn't know about what's going on there without the internet, and they've become kind of internet sensations. Women singing, women without their hijabs. All of that helps global pressure to change the norms in countries that are more shut and closed down like that. It's also, helped women organize. The women's protest in what year was it originally? 2017, I guess, along with a number of other, protests and things like that, not exclusively on the left either, right? The internet connects us. The internet helps us mobilize. It is and can be a force for good, but when you look at the statistics, not to bring it back to, sad trombone land over here, but when you look at the statistics, the truth is still that men's work is shared more, men are louder, even on Reddit, which is, really one of the most, I think the most visited site on the internet. It's called the front page of the internet for a reason. 73% of accounts are male accounts. Women don't feel safe on that platform. I just want to get to a point where we all feel that we can express our opinions to the same degree as the guy to our right and to our left, right? And right now that's not happening. So it is extremely powerful. I just want to make sure that we can empower us to the fullest extent possible.
Thank you for that. What's your advice for a social media manager for a public agency who can't block trolls or otherwise, limit comments, and really what tools might they be able to push back with?
Yeah, so making sure that you use the mute button, because nobody can know if you've muted them. So if you've got a persistent kind of heckler on your public agency's page, using the mute button I think is a really great way to never see that content, and also making sure that you have the support that you need, because there is such a thing as vicarious trauma. So even though they're not directing the abuse at you, it might be toward your agency, you still are the one reading and processing it, and so making sure that you're taking breaks from it, individually kind of trying to switch around with your colleagues who sees all of that if possible, so it's not just one person all the time. All of that's really important. And then if you're needing, unfortunately, to look at like video content for whatever reason, I work with a lot of open source investigators who have to watch terrible things on the internet and investigate what's going on them. And if you watch it without the sound off, sound is a really big it really sticks with you and can traumatize more than just visuals. So watching with the sound off is one way to do it. I hope that people aren't sending you horrific images as the manager of a public agency social media account, but I've seen weirder things happen on the internet. So those are the main tips that I would have.
Those are fantastic. 2 last questions
Right.
here. Some of the volume that you talked about suggests that these attacks are AI generated and that some of it has been triggered that way. Can you give us some strategies for recognizing AI posts and attacks? And are there different ways of dealing with that than what you just suggested?
So a lot of the volume that I referenced actually was before the accessibility of AI really exploded. It's hard to remember, but it was only about a year plus ago that many of these, year and a half-ish, that many of these technologies became publicly accessible for the first time. So some of this is happening in an automated way, but that doesn't necessarily mean it's AI enabled or driven. If you see like the same phrase being copy and pasted over and over by accounts that look kind of spammy, either they don't have a profile picture or letters and numbers as a handle, that's a good indication that it might be a bot farm. With AI related content, I am sorry to inform you that it is now, with good AI created content, almost impossible for a non-expert to tell the difference. Now, this doesn't mean that you should be super scared and not believe anything you see online. There are still some telltale signs. You can look at teeth, you can look at ears, you can look at fingers, but even that isn't always as good to see if there is a clear sign of AI generated content. And you're probably thinking, what about teeth, ears, fingers? They just look weird. Like you look at it, you're like, that's not right. Something is wrong there. Or they have like 6 fingers or 7 fingers. That's a good sign. But we also have AI generated audio now. Again, to the naked ear, almost impossible to tell the difference. So you have to really look at the content itself. And the most important thing that anybody can do, especially in the next 100 days or so, when you're encountering breaking news online or just scrolling your Instagram or whatever before you go to bed at night, which none of us should do. Everyone here should stop doing that. I do it too. But if you feel yourself getting emotional, there's a good chance you're being manipulated. So always remember this, the most engaging content online is the most enraging content. If you're getting mad, somebody wants you to get mad, and there's a reason. So that's when you put your phone down. It doesn't matter if it's AI generated or not, somebody doesn't have your best interests at heart. With AI, though, the big kind of wedge issue that I would say affects women primarily is this deepfake pornography issue. 98% of deepfakes online are deepfake pornography, and 99% of that is deepfake porn of women. So it's a huge thing. And if next time you hear somebody talking about like a deepfake nuclear disaster video, like tell them to get real, because it's mostly about how women are being abused online.
Last question.
Yep.
What piece of musical theater most brings you joy and inspires you, Nina?
Oh, I mean, brings me joy and inspires me are probably 2 different Two different answers. I mean, I love Hamilton. I feel like of new musicals, it's probably the best one. When I go back to like older stuff, West Side Story is one of my favorites. I've done everything from like Little Shop of Horrors to The Addams Family to You're a Good Man, Charlie Brown. So my tastes are wide and varied, and I don't care if that makes me a nerd because some people watch cars drive around in circles, and that is okay. That is okay. Oh, do we get another one? No? All right.
Please join me in thanking Nina for all of these wonderful